I see you, Roderick Tung, because I saw a man in a really cool suit. There he is. We have time if you guys want to hear Rod talk. You want to come up?
You.
That's a great picture, man.
Well, thank you for having me. This is an incredible occasion and an awesome location. Fantastic. So I do think that we keep asking whether we need better mapping tools or better ablation tools for VT. And I would say that we're probably over 90% there with mapping. So I think it's time for ablation. I mean, I don't think that you need 1,000 points on the isthmus. And actually, if you look at ultra high density mapping, you typically have about 4 or 5 electrodes that are the diastolic corridor. And the fact that we can find these and understand the three-dimensionality of this, it really tells us that we probably don't need a lot of lesions. We need them really transmural in very strategic areas. So I would say we've kind of run with the ILAM concept and the functional substrate mapping of finding fixed boundaries. And then if you have a line of block, really to just give a great lesion on both sides of it, and that'll typically interrupt it. So we've been really fortunate to have field support for some of our compassionate cases at Banner. We got in some discussions and said, what if we really try to do targeted pulse field ablation? We did publish the first case in the US with Farapulse with an apical led by Katrapati, our fellow now attending. And we were saddened, we were excited that the VT terminated in an incessant case, but the electrograms really didn't change much, and that speaks to the superficiality of what its original intention was. So we were really excited about the depth of what Steve and the team had been building that is offering the promise of something more transmural and a lot deeper. So I want to just share one case that definitely left an impression for all of us. This whole team was there. This was a 61-year-old woman that Pete Weiss had done not once, but twice with a non-ischemic cardiomyopathy of 20%. And Pete's my partner, and he's just a fantastic person and electrophysiologist. Daily episodes of VT, just nonstop, 2 ablations, and they said this is septal. So when we were talking about something compassionate, we're like, Steve, what can we potentially do? We got to find a really desperate case. So we start with the MRI, and this is the MRI you wouldn't wish upon your worst enemy. When you're going in for battle, if you were to do a live case, you probably wouldn't want to choose this. But here you can see that you've got scar in the top portion of the donut that's basically going from 9 o'clock all the way to 2 o'clock. And even more so, if you take a look here, there's actually an epicardial and mid-myocardial component that goes and belongs to the right ventricle as well. So I think these are the worst VTs that we have. And you suspect there's definitely going to be mid-myocardial circuitry. The LV epicardium, if you look at that left side, actually involves the RVOT there as well. And this is someone with non-ischemic cardiomyopathy that was genetic negative. So the story continues, and we say this is a perfect case because maybe if we can get deep, we don't need to go epicardial on this or whatnot. So we induce, and there's 2 slow VTs. These 2 VTs also are not what you would want to wish upon your worst enemy, because they look really different. One looks like it's a left bunduloid with no transition, and the other one looks like a tall right bundle with no transition, and it seems like these are quite disparate. These are quite disparate VTs, so it's going to be a potentially long day with these VTs. We do our voltage map, which has been celebrated for 3 years historically. Some of the new things that we've been doing is trying to look at voltage independent mapping, which is looking at regions of wavefront discontinuities, or conduction slowing, aka the slow pathway for VT. And then now more specifically, we've taken ILAM to 2.0, looking for lines of block. And we don't see an overt line of block, but you definitely see there's something a little strange there with where the green and the orange meet, and the rest of it looks good, but it doesn't look like there's something very clear. So we have the luxury of mapping, and actually Steve was in the lab that day, and we have the luxury of mapping this VT. And I would love for people to take a look at this activation map because we've got all 3 chambers. We've done the work for you. We've got the RV endo, the LV endo, and you've got the epi. And we do high density mapping of this. And the reason we went to the epi, and we were hoping not to, is because you've got a focal breakthrough on the RV that passively moves over to the RV on the endo. And then when you look at the epicardium, you've got something that looks like it does a clockwise turn around a line of block. And that clockwise turn area correlates with the anterior interventricular groove or the LAD. So what you have is incomplete reentry on all three surfaces that you can actually map, which tells you there's probably something that is deeper below the surface. And maybe something sneaking through when it comes around the RV, it does a disappearing act, and then emerges on the LV. But that correlates really well with that R-wave dominant VT that looks like a lateral LV summit exit. So beautiful. And then in order to be able to prove something is a three-dimensional VT, we use logical inferences of activation gaps, so that the activation that you do map is great, but the activation that you can't map is even more meaningful when you think about VT in a three-dimensional world. So if I'm gonna try to compel you and tell you that that yellow jumps in and dives into a line of block under the LAD and then emerges at the purple-white, that means we're missing yellow to the green to the light blue to the dark blue. You're missing three isochronal colors, which is where you can't find it. So that's something that's probably mid-myocardial because we're also on the endo and we don't see it there. So you can make these logical inferences of VT in three dimensions, which is exactly the type of case you would need where you get deeper lesions. The activation gaps tell the story because that's early diastolic in yellow, and then you've got something that's just at systole, but you're missing the diastolic buffet. You don't have all the stuff that you're looking for. And then, even more compelling, would be to maybe think about entrainment. So we've now thought about VT as a hyperboloid, where you take the Stevenson model, and you've got two lateral lines, but then put it in a rotisserie, and you spin it around, and Takuro Nishimura published the paper in Circulation, where we now think about VT as a hyperboloid, where this isthmus is constrained in all three dimensions. And therefore, a line of block on the surface doesn't mean that that line of block is transmural. It can then serve as a depth boundary in cross-section where it goes under it and emerges, but it's constraining that isthmus by pushing it down from the surface. And we're only looking at one slice of the iceberg. So that would be what it would look like with the hyperboloid, where you only see yellow and you only see purple, but you gotta imagine that the rest of all the action has to be below the surface. So that's a three-dimensional pattern. And when we wanna prove that, let's make Bill Stevenson happy and entrain this here from 1314, which is something that's in early diastole in the yellow, and you've got beautiful concealed fusion. You've got a beautiful PPI. It's fair game. So that circuit is real. It's not just a pattern that you're seeing. That yellow is actually mechanistically the entrance site, and then purple is there. So this is where you don't want to be ablating over the activation gap, because why is there an activation gap in the first place? It's because you've got surface fibrosis. So we've now learned that in order to target these, you need to either have a transmural technology that can go through the surface fibrosis, which we think maybe pulse field is better than RF, because you're trying to burn through scar, which no one wants to do, or you try to hit where it resurfaces or where it dives in. And this is what makes VT fun. This is where I'm saying is we don't need to map better than this. This is clear cut what we're dealing with. This is an intramural VT that's missing a lot of components. The vantage points would be the entrance at the yellow and the exit where it resurfaces at purple. And you would want to target this on the epicardium. And I looked at Steve and I was like, have you done any human epicardial ones? And he goes, maybe, maybe not. And let's go for it, maybe, because I don't want to try it from the LV endo because this seems like we've got the entrainment of an entrance. So this is the perfect example where everything's mapped perfectly, but in the world of RF, you might not succeed with this. And we need something deeper. So we deliver a pulse there at the purple, which is where it resurfaces. And we've actually done some work where the resurfacing site is the most likely. And right away, boom, with the pulse, it terminates. And one thing that we don't understand still is whether the termination is specific or not. If this is a big cardioversion locally, is that specific or not? We're not sure, but we've actually have observed with another case that you can get non-termination with a pulse, which I think is great because we like specificity when we're doing these cases, and that's termination of VT1. It's important to know that that line of block was a fixed boundary because even on this PVC, which is another wavefront, you can see there's a separation of that catheter that's driving a line with two populations. So that is where it's serving there as a complete fixed line of block as well. And we had the luxury of being able to map a VT before we did it And we mapped VT2, and recall that was the left bundle that was far away with no transition that you would put at the RV apex, or maybe the RV free wall. And this is before the PFA of this, and what we see is VT2 is going counterclockwise around, which is gorgeous. So they're doing mirror images of him. And this is actually the demonstration of a shared isthmus. So I told Steve, this is like maybe one of the most beautiful cases we've ever mapped out because we've got a shared isthmus. But how beautiful is it to show that that's a shared isthmus across the entire heart? You've got something that's exiting the lateral summit, and then you've got something that's exiting kind of the mid-RV free wall. And that's because it's jumping through a mid-myocardial bridge under the LAD. And that's really beautiful. And that's why we advocate for blading on both sides of the line of block, because if the VT reverses itself, you're getting the exit on one side, you're getting the entrance on the other side. And we don't want to go where the LAD is, because that's where the scar was. So we actually did check the coronaries, and we did not see any clinical spasm or any angiographic spasm as well. But this is a really beautiful example of an epicardial VT where we had the luxury of being able to have Steve in the lab. We did a pulse there on the epicardium, was able to terminate that. This was the other VT, and you can see, again, the same activation gap. It's going the other direction. You get exit out there, and then you've got entrance. And this is the perfect example of why I believe we do not need better mapping. We've got all the tools. This is as good as you can do to be able to characterize the VT in terms of how it lives, where it lives, which chamber, how much is three-dimensional, how much activation gap do we have. We've got that. We just need a better tool to be able to eliminate it. We entrained VT2 from the exit site as well. And then here you can see we pulse it on the other side of the line. We get kind of a strange termination where you get a little bit of ectopy and then it goes away. And that's the termination of VT2. So that's 2 pulses for the entire case. And then we decided, well, we probably shouldn't leave it at just 2, so we'll do another one next to it, 1 above it, and maybe there are 4 on each side. And there were 8 applications in total, 7. And then we were done. And that was the case. And I think that's exciting that we can spend all this time on mapping, really characterize it, and hopefully this is transmural. And we were able to get this patient non-inducible. And obviously, so this is what we're now envisioning VT to look like. And when you take a look at it as a hyperboloid and you think, wow, anytime I map and I'm only seeing a focal breakout and then it wraps back around, we call that a break and wrap pattern. That's because you get all that demonstration of intramural circuitry. We don't need more mapping tools. We don't need 10,000 points. We can understand this already with current tools. We need better ablation technology. We remap that area, and you can see that area is entirely gray. I should have provided electrograms because that's my biggest pet peeve. You should never show a map without electrograms, and I violated that. And then we do a PET scan later because we're like, this is weird. It kind of looks like sarcoid. And indeed, she was diagnosed with cardiac sarcoidosis. All of her daily ATPs are gone. She's had very infrequent single episodes of ATP. I believe it's 3 in total. And the lessons from this is that isthmuses are meant to be shared. You could have very disparate circuits where you get looks like lateral summit in the LV, looks like RV apical, but these lines of block can really reverse themselves 180. They are often depth boundaries, and that's why we've demonstrated that VT lives in 3 dimensions. We need novel therapies to attack septal substrates, and we need the promise of something that can deliver very localized transmural lesions around these lines of block. And that's what we hope for Field and our partnership. Thank you very much.